so we're here with SpiceGod. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is SpiceGod. I'm a 21-year-old music producer from Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
All right. At 21 years old, how did you get started with music production?
I got started in music in general. When I was 10 years old, I got my first guitar, and it was something I wanted to do. I wanted to play music. Got into playing drums and stuff in elementary school as well.
Okay.
And around middle school, that led into music production. Through electronic music, I kind of gained interest in making sounds on a computer. Mainly led by the fact that I didn't have to depend on any other people. I could do my own grind.
Yeah,
So,
I feel you.
around the time I was 13, downloaded some software on my computer, started making dance music. Eventually that led to making beats, and 8 years later, here I am working on music production still.
Well, seeing as that you started that young, do you remember like the first song or like your first complete project that you put out?
I have stuff online still that's terrible.
Yeah.
Like under different names and stuff. It's definitely been a journey.
For sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
like when you've been doing it for, even just 8 years, like a lot of change happens. Like it takes time to develop. And yeah, there's definitely some old music that it ain't it.
Right. So one of the biggest things that I do, like, I'll go back and listen to like all of those old things because I like to see like the progression.
I was just doing that the other day.
Yeah. So when you do that, what kind of does that motivate you to go more? Does that make you want to go back and kind of try what you wanted to do like when you were that age? Or
I do it sometimes just to put myself in check.
Right.
If I'm in a mood where like shit's popping and I'm doing well and I'm feeling good about what I'm doing, sometimes I just listen to that old stuff and I say, this is where you were, like, you still gotta work harder, like, that's where you were, this is where you are now, where are you going next?
Okay, so kind of like to humble yourself.
I use my old music to humble myself. I'll listen to stuff and say, like, you weren't there before, you're there now. Can you do that in the future, looking back at what you're making now?
Okay, yeah. Well, seeing as you have been in it for a while, who are some of like your favorite local artists to work with?
I actually haven't been involved in the local scene for a very long time.
Okay.
I didn't really start involving myself with the local scene until about 8 months ago. I spent a lot of time just kind of isolated, working on my craft, trying to figure my music out. And as it stands, people I work with, primarily my homie Mankey. We work out of the studio a lot. He's definitely one of my close friends. We work on production and stuff. My homie Trip, he engineers at the studio with me as well. We do a lot of music together. But also just other people like Lucian Parker. He's a good friend. We've done a couple of tracks together, and I'm just constantly trying to meet new people, to be honest. Yeah.
Okay. Well, when you think about the local scene, I know you said that you're just now getting back into it, but when you hear about like the Milwaukee music scene, what kind of comes to mind?
I think there's a lot of unheard talent right now.
For sure.
We're starting to see development in like coverage and like people like supporting it and bringing attention to it, but the hip hop scene as it stands in Milwaukee has a lot of unheard talent. It's just crazy when I see these people that like are doing these little shows and are like coming through and just making music at the studio and stuff. Like there's some really good stuff that's being made, and there's definitely a lot of artists that I think there's definitely enough talent to the point where like now it's what's next. How do we push it? How do we push that talent to a bigger stage?
What do you say, or what would you say is needed to do that? Do you think that there needs to be like a big event to happen? Okay, so more of like camaraderie. I know that a lot of times the Milwaukee scene kind of gets downplayed a lot because people will say like we're not together in it and we kind of like hating on each other and that crab in a barrel kind of mindset.
I mean that's how it is in everywhere really. I mean no one's really always working together everywhere, but because we're kind of a smaller city, It's not like a Chicago or an Atlanta. Like, it's a smaller city. It's easier to like look at it that way, I feel.
Yeah, so it gets magnified, and that's what I kind of say too. I think that wherever you go, you'll kind of have that a little bit. But at the end of the day, we still need to do our part.
Yeah.
You know.
And no, I definitely think there are things that have been done. I mean, for example, last night I was at High Five Studios. They had a marketing or networking event,
Okay.
a jam session, and that's the kind of stuff that like just meeting people and like interacting with other musicians, like connecting, is kind of what needs to be done.
So you think that the more you started to kind of network, that feeling of like isolation is kind of gone away then?
Yeah, I think definitely since I've started working with more people, like it's definitely broadened my horizons and definitely like gotten me further. I think people downplay like what other people can do and try and want to be all self-made.
Right. Well, what do you think that you bring personally to like the music scene, or what do you bring in from a production standpoint that's different from other artists that are out here?
From a musical standpoint, I'd say I just have a different background than a lot of people I've met that produce primarily in hip hop. I wasn't necessarily the biggest hip hop listener growing up. Like, I was kind of more into, like Nirvana and that type of like rock shit. But as my musical taste progressed, I started to kind of feel more of especially the rhythms and like the drums, because I am a drummer in hip hop production. But I feel like I can just kind of bring different musical inspiration. It's really just about what you draw from, what you know. Like, you can't fake that. What you grew up on, what you know musically, what you listen to, that's what's gonna like shape what you do.
Right. So seeing as you are trained in multiple different instruments, and like you said, you do come from like a different musical background, have you ventured into like being in bands and like that kind of thing with other local artists?
I haven't been too focused on trying to do any of that. No. Still primarily a producer first, but I mean, it's definitely something down the line that like I'd be interested in doing, integrating live instrumentation.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been working on production side, integrating like live instrumentation. Plus, I want to try and put live instrumentation into what I'm doing.
Okay. Yeah, but I think about like a lot of, some of my favorite producers, and I think about like Zaytoven putting in like live keys, or Just Blaze putting in live drum loops and like different things like that. It's always interesting to see somebody that actually is trained in instruments, because like you said, a lot of people do start off being trained in like a digital workshop. So the fact that you do play live instruments kind of leaves your end goal a lot farther open. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I definitely say when I look up to like where I want to be, I don't look at the biggest producer. I look at like people beyond that, like behind the scenes. Like, I want to be like a Rick Rubin. I don't want to be a Metro Boomin.
Right. I got you. Yeah. So with that being said, then I know that you kind of talked about being isolated from the Milwaukee music scene. When you were kind of doing that and perfecting your craft, what kind of thoughts were going through your head? Did you have like doubts, and what kind of things did you have to overcome during that period to get to where you are now?
I mean, I didn't take it that seriously. Music was just a hobby to me. It was just what I found therapy in, doing in my free time. Like, making music in my bedroom, just like creating sounds, was just like something that was fun to me.
Right.
It wasn't like, this is what I want to do. But then at a certain point, it became like, hey, maybe I can do this. And when I realized that, I said, okay, let's do it. And it kind of was a different mentality. So that whole time, I wasn't even really thinking about like being a producer. I was just like, I'm making beats, it's fun, like this is what I just enjoy doing.
That's cool. Well, go ahead and give us your social medias and your where they can find your music links at.
You can find me on Instagram, where else? Snapchat, Facebook. It's SpiceGod, and the instead of an O, it's a 0. So Spice G0D. On Twitter, Spice_God_. Someone took that Spice G0D. So hit him up, tweet at him, tell him I need my handle.
Hell yeah. You got any shout outs you want to give?
Big shout out to, like I said, Trip Mankey, my homies. Shout out to my manager, Jake Stern. Shout out to Lucian Parker, owns the studio. Just shout out to anyone I worked with, anyone that's been there. If I haven't met you yet, then let's link up.
All right. Well, again, this is SpiceGod. Thanks for tuning in.